he'd rather take his time taking road trips, and thing locked. Out of practice more than anyone. And he'd rather take his time writing on post-war landscapes. Without further ado, Steve Graves.
Not an anthropologist, a geographer, but one of the things I tell my students, it's probably very similar to you guys, the ability to develop the ability to see evidence and to interpret it. And so I call our majors Jedis, right? And I then call that Jedi goggles, to be able to see something. And certainly if are there any the archaeologist type among you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, you guys would pick up an old tooth or something and tell, this thing eats grass. Not, it's the type of thing that you would see and know how to read that evidence. And for geographers, the built environment is one of those things that I think the students should be able to see and read. So we're going to sort of put on our Jedi goggles. Now, will that thing still... Well, I'm not so visible, but that is, and that's all good. In fact, I would argue that that's actually a better video now that I'm somewhat in the shadows. I'm assuming that some of you, if not all of you, have read the what to call that. It's almost like it was supposed to be a map, and then it turned into sort of an essay associated with the map. This was the map. It was much cooler earlier because it was supposed to be a placemat. Like you, when I was a kid, you would go to the sit-down restaurants like at Denny's or something. They would give you a placemat and some crayons, and that was the idea, a very 50s sort of thing. And you were to help Woody and Buzz find their way across the San Fernando Valley, and this was supposed to be the streets of the San Fernando Valley. But then on the way, they had to, go to Rocket Bowl or, the Cowboy Palace or something, things like that. When I first moved here, and as the essay talks about, my kids were little, and so we were watching a lot of Toy Story, and I realized, man, the San Fernando Valley, it's ground zero for Woody and Buzz. It's around every corner. This is a pretty long quote. You wouldn't have to read it, of course, but basically I argue in the essay that cowboys and spacemen are essentially two sides of the same coin, masculine, very American, paternalistic, and a Cold War thing. And though one is looking forward and the other is looking backwards, in some ways they're actually really just the same. And so since you've read that, I won't rehash the entire drama of the Woody and Buzz essay, but sort of take a step back into, I have a pretty extensive slide collection. This one I took when I was not born yet. No. I have, I don't know, maybe 10,000 of these old ones collected from deceased or at least retired professors, and they start in the 50s, and I love the color, right? And they did road trips around the country, and I like to look at the gas station signs, those sorts of things. Schlitz. Look at the tail fins. With the big American car with tail fins. And that was great. It was some small town in Wyoming on September 7th, 1959. I copied it and just sent an unsolicited, anonymous email, basically, to the Historical Society of that little town. I said, maybe you'd like this. I sent it today. And so we're going to step back and try to look at, use the landscape, the built environment of this era in order to try to interpret their ways of thinking and feeling back then. And a famous geographer, a fellow named Pierce Lewis, has called the built landscape our unwitting autobiography. And by that, he suggests it is our autobiography. It's a story about us that people didn't know we were writing as we did it collectively. And in a way, it makes it so very honest, because when you write on purpose, you might fabricate or embellish. But this is, in some ways, the unvarnished truth. But the problem with the landscape as a text is that it wasn't really meant to be read. And so it's like trying to read Chinese or some other data. Well, the sort of things that you guys would be reading, midden mounds and that sort of thing, where you're doing a lot of interpretation. So we're going to try to understand these landscapes a bit, the architecture, through as if we were driving around here. It's one of my favorite little fantasies that I could go back to the San Fernando Valley on the day my house was built and just sort of breathe the air and experience it. I was born after that and only partially have gotten to experience this sort of post-war between, and what I'm particularly fascinated is between essentially the beginning, from the 20s to the 70s, somewhere in there, sort of the interwar period and the immediate post-war era. So, in order to start that, we have to kind of back up, and this is Angelino Heights. Have you guys been down there? And it's a cool place. It's got a lot of Victorians. They film a lot of things. And before this era, the United States didn't have a great sense of itself in terms of our built landscape, and so we referred to the Europeans all the time in order to cast, in order to be able to interpret or we use European reference in order to communicate. So we're communicating classiness here, right? So we've got to be British. These are, Queen Anne, Victorian. I should say it with a British accent, right? Quite sophisticated up there. Or then we could refer to the Italians, right? This is Italianate. Or the French. Or maybe even occasionally the Spanish. But we didn't really have much of our own. This is craftsman or arts and crafts style. And though it is British, the Americans were like, this kind of looks like us. It's rough-hewn, it's less refined, and it spun off into something that became more American, which is, again, this is the arts and crafts, but the prairie style. And you can see that they're cousins. They're sort of related to each other. I don't know, maybe the architectural historians would argue with me on that, but I don't care, I'm a geographer. We just look at the exteriors a lot and come up with, but the sort of focus on the natural and the obvious reference to American things, the prairie style of Frank Lloyd Wright. There's not a great deal of this in the valley. Because the valley sort of came after this, there wasn't much of us here. It's really just the cow country, as Bing Crosby called it. You guys heard that song? It was a huge hit during the early war years, called the San Fernando Valley. Gonna make the San Fernando Valley my home. And he talks about he's going to move to the country, to the cow country. You can forward his mail, care of RFD, Rural Farm Delivery, there wasn't any there here at that point. Frank Lloyd Wright's son, just Lloyd Wright, designed and built this house, and it's over in the corner of Tampa and Valerio Street, and you can kind of peek at it, and it's sort of, a Frank Lloyd Wright thing, but it's rustic, and it, but also has this great sweeping sort of wing on it, which makes it difficult for me to guess exactly what it is in terms of style. And it's a tiny little house, but it's cute as can be. And if you get over on Tampa at Valerio, look over the fence and you can see it. Sometimes the lady will let you come in and visit. So that's the sort of American evolution of style. There's a second one that I want to talk about that's Art Deco. And during this early period around World War I, not just the Americans, but everybody was particularly fascinated with the hope of the great mechanical age that was dawning on us. And it's a very hopeful time, right? Science and technology, we can accomplish anything. And they looked to these things that moved, steamships, ocean liners, streamlined locomotives. Those were the height of technology. They were sort of these things, or better ones like the ones you guys have. So it's funny that they begin to design buildings that don't move at all to look like they might move, right? I love these things. There's a lot of this. This is South Beach in Miami, and there's a ton of it down there. This one, I believe, in San Francisco, and I don't know where this one is. I stole it.
That's the Pan Pacific.
The Pan Pacific, that's right.
So mid-Wilshire, wow.
Los Angeles has a good chunk of this kind of stuff, the Wilshire District and downtown. It's probably the second best collection of Art Deco stuff in the United States outside of Miami. And unfortunately, for fans of Art Deco, it occurred during the Great Depression. So many of the cities in the United States really don't have a lot of it because, well, it was the Great Depression. My hometown has like one Art Deco thing because during the Great Depression, the economy sucked in that place and nothing was happening, right? They weren't building new buildings. But where there were rich people taking vacations and the movie industry was still was one of the few industries that wasn't devastated during the Great Depression, that you still find that kind of architecture. So we have the two antecedents to what is really the mid-century architecture that I also like. But man, I just love this stuff here. Pasadena and Angelino Heights has it, so makes me happy to look at it. And I like this too. But then, and here's some of the other Art Deco stuff that you find around Los Angeles are these sort of more monumental things. There's not a whole lot of it in the domestic sphere. This is on Wilshire. This is where?
That's the Bullocks, isn't it?
No,
that's not the Bullocks.
This is the
Is it the Wiltern here?
The Wiltern Theater.
Yeah.
And this oh no.
No, it's
This is, it is, I think it's the Wiltern or the 210. I thought it was I took my class to a field trip there. Union Station, another place where the Shakers and the Mover went, and this has the architecture there is sort of this California deco, which is a little bit Mission Revival and a little bit Art Deco. They weren't sure just what they wanted to do, so I like it extra because it's like a special LA version of that, where it's a reference to this sort of romantic California past where everybody looked like Antonio Banderas and they were married to Penelope Cruz. That's the Mission Revival reference, right? And then, but it's a train station, so we got to update it and make it groovy. And in 1930s, that was it is. There's a nice one. That's the Santa Monica
City Hall.
City Hall, right? I started to say courthouse, and that wasn't quite right, but there might be a court in there. I don't know.
It's around the corner.
Hopefully, I've been in a court. But
But OJ and his car chase were around the corner.
there you go. It could have. This thing looks like it might float. It might take off. So again, a reference. And then there are simpler ones scattered here and there. And this is a pharmacy over in Glendale, and the telltale sign of the repetition, like a machine has stamped out the pattern over and over again. And it's again a sort of a hopefulness that machines will deliver us from the misery of the past. It has some dangers. If you've watched the old Charlie Chaplin movie, suddenly the name, I want to say it's called Modern Times, where he's stuck in the factory, and there's a famous scene. They're starting to recognize there's some cracks in the fantasy about the future that appears in that. Not a great deal of this architecture can be found at the domestic level. The Art Deco here, this is up near Angelino Heights. It expresses itself in some of the old gas stations that are found around. Not all of these are LA. This one's out on Route 66, but you can see the sort of lines that suggest it might be. And this gas station might just be a steamliner. It's used to convey confidence to the motorist that the gasoline that you're putting in your car is the most technologically advanced, right? They're still trying to sell us on that. And your milk. And this is one of those, I'm not exactly sure what they were trying to do, but clearly there's a bit of that reference in there somewhere. That your milk also was hygienic and clean and safe for your babies. And so then the reference has to be advanced, technological, hygienic. So at some point, though, steamliners and steamships, locomotives become passé, not advanced enough. It has to be more advanced. So in the post-war era, those sort of steam trains and ocean-going vessels become less a reference, and instead space-age things like jets and flying saucers replace that, and that's where Woody or Buzz comes into the picture. You get lots of these references. Rocket Photo Lab, right? We had, and we'll see, there was Rocket Bowl, there's Rocket Liquor. There's a lot of rocket references here in the San Fernando Valley, largely because this was also ground zero for the defense industry, Chatsworth, the neighborhood I call Love and Rockets now because it's got a secondary industry. Love and Rockets, it's the 1980s band. The psych, no psych majors, they would, Thanatosaneros, right? You know, what's going on with that? And the gas stations couldn't just be streamlined. They had to look like they were about to fly away in order to assure you that the gasoline was, in this case, certified, high quality, high tech. Lots of pointy things. Pointy things all over the place. This is a car wash with lots of pointy things. Pointy pastrami's. I love this. This is so LA, isn't it? Pastrami, tacos, and burritos. Where else in the country can you get those? You could get a taco, a pastrami taco, or and again in another place. Same pointy thing, different company. I'm assuming this may have been a chain at some point that failed, and they were taken over by, in this case, Jim and Chris, and then Jim again, but in a different part, Mexican food, tacos, and pastrami, because you can't get rid of the pastrami no matter where you go. Lots of pointy things. These I call the Sputniks. Sputnik in '59, I think, is the Russian satellite that was put into orbit and put the American people into a panic about our ability to keep up with the Russians, right? We've got a rocket gap, we've got an education gap, and now you can take Algebra 1 in 8th grade for the very first time. Had to catch up with the Russians. And we put our own satellite that didn't do much except beep, but it gets incorporated into lots of this mid-century landscape. Cantor's Deli's got a little Sputnik up there. It's got a pointy thing. I like the fonts. I'm crazy about fonts. I like them. Vegas, they've got a pointy thing. There's some pointy things. The chevrons are everywhere. And this is my favorite font. I call this the Flintstone font. I'm assuming our friend David Dice downstairs, who's the staff cartographer, would know. He probably has a name for that font. He's got a million fonts memorized in his head. You ever need a font for something? He'll help you out. Clean, right? There's lots of pointy things. Norms, lots of pointy. Look, more Flintstone font on La Paloma. I don't know why the Flintstones and chevrons go together so well, but they do appear that they do. More a bit of the Flintstones at Dino's Motel down off the 405 there. These are various spots around L.A. Oak Park, Chevron. There's a Chevron over on, that's Topanga Canyon. Next to Dr. Dove, who rocks. Is that the creepiest dude for your kids? Scared me. And if they don't have a Chevron, just call it Rocket Liquor. This is the older, better sign of the two, Rocket Liquor. And this was next to essentially what I suppose was Rocketdyne and some iteration over in Canoga Park, where they've now started to tear it down. It's disappearing, but Rocket Liquor will endure on. Rocket Bowl is gone, and that was over in Chatsworth, Northridge border area. I never can tell quite for sure what neighborhood some things are in. No rockets, Astro. To infinity and beyond. And even things like King Taco, it's this boomerangy thing with a chevron down at the bottom to let you know that even the Mexican Americans in LA were still thinking about the space program, still letting you know that these are out of this world. And they're hidden sometimes too. You see the sort of thing there in the West End Liquor and in Canoga Park. I was taking this because I have a huge collection of the dispensary photos. I've been interested in how they try to sell themselves, either as like, it's all natural, man, or let's party, dude. You know, different signs, different landscape themes that they're going with. This one was very disappointed. It's got some pointy things, but they replaced, you can see that this font's been replaced. Yeah. No fun with that font. You know, come on, guys. You're out there on Route 66, and you got cheap on the replacement sign. There's the Flintstone font again. Lots of pointy things there, right? Everything will stab you in the 50s. It will all be pretty, but it's all very aerodynamic. Everything's aerodynamic, even the buildings that don't need to be aerodynamic. What a classic building that is.
Everybody know where this is? You don't see that over on Ventura Boulevard, Cosmic Cadillac? That's a great drive-by.
It is a nice spot. And sometimes it's not the sign. The whole building is built as a chevron. This I'm hoping they haven't quite torn this down
No,
yet.
they're keeping it as a historical monument for film shoots and things.
Okay, and a really quirky movie called Night on Earth. It's like Last Night on Earth, kind of a romantic comedy starts there. It's a good one to rent. It's probably easy to find on YouTube now rather than impossible to find anywhere else. And so they built it into, this is a Western Dental, which God knows, I'm assuming it was some kind of a restaurant before. Restaurants were, especially those that served burgers, were also very keen, like the gas stations, to assure their customers that everything's on the up and up, it's hygienic, it's clean, because nobody was quite sure, especially early on, what goes in a hamburger, right? And so the building had to do part of the job of selling confidence in the food. You won't get food poisoning here, really. Look, we've got lots of glass and steel and porcelain and pointy things. How could we ever, be old-fashioned that way? I don't even know what to call that building. It's the wacky one over on Ventura Boulevard that looks like it's a bunch of grills to an old Cadillac or something.
Actually, the former one, it looks a lot like the old House of the Future at Disney.
Yeah,
That was my first thought.
lots of glass and steel and concrete. And, it seems like whatever's in here is always perpetually going out of business, though. So either the location is bad or people just don't want to be seen going into that building nowadays. But at one point, I'm assuming it was successful. That's Hampton Coliseum there in Virginia. Lots of pointy things there. And another pointy thing building. This is a lot of just pictures of pointy stuff for a while. A Firestone building down in Newport with the car of the future in front. And a car wash, not pointy, but expressing motion and clean lines. Car washes are another one of those things that seem to thrive on imagery of the future. And from my spot where I went to grad school, Champaign-Urbana, it's, I forget what it's called now, like the State Farm Center, but it was just the spaceship on South Campus. Again, just a lots and lots of monuments to our faith in the future. It's very hopeful, and it's expressed in so many other ways. John F. Kennedy. To me, this is the zeitgeist of the time. We hire a young, handsome guy who wants to take us to, we elect a young, handsome guy that wants to take us to the moon. And that story is being written on the landscape as well. How does it express itself in domestic architecture? Well, some people are bold enough to live in a space house or one of those geodesic domes or like the big golf ball houses or something, but not very many people. And those are kind of unusual. So what you do get are these houses called just modern with an E on the end, sometimes exaggerated modern, but you see the expression of the jet's wings, the big bomber, the Delta Dart from the U.S. Air Force expressed in the housing over and over again. There's a lot of these in the San Fernando Valley. So many of them that I don't really have a good photo collection of them because I don't have to tell people what these things look like. These are there's several of these are these Eichler homes that are reasonably famous, and they're in, I want to say Granada Hills. I like that one. It's got a pointy thing, and it's sweeping. It could fly. You never know when it's going to take off. When I was a kid, I just called this Jetsons architecture. Judy
Do you guys
Jetson.
know Jetsons?
Elroy,
right. And the Jetsons were, interestingly enough, the counterpoint to the Flintstones. And in my mind, this is all sort of conflated, right? Maybe that's why the Flintstones font appears on the Jetsons car wash, That's all Hanna-Barbera, Another one. The kids' movie that's associated, in my mind, with this house is The Incredibles.
Incredibles, yeah.
And he has a streamlined car that pulls up in the driveway.
That's his house.
And it's his house. It gets blown up in the one episode, but to me, and there's a sort of the cartoon noir element a bit to that. References to the good old days in the 50s when Superman and the supers were still around. This is down in Woodland Hills. Again, sort of a space-age house. I should have maybe had some more interior spaces, because this interior shot's a very spacey, sparse decorations a lot of times, not a bunch of crud. Certainly not country clutter, which is what comes to follow this. In my mind, a lot of these houses of this sort were the Brady Bunch houses. When I was a kid, my hometown had almost none of this, and the Brady Bunch was that ideal California family, and they lived in a sort of, and Mike Brady, the dad, was an architect in the thing, and they had one of these sort of swept wing modern houses. I think it may have been, and that's here in LA somewhere. Maybe Studio City. And a really unique LA version of this, it's called the dingbat. And the dingbat, this is an LA thing. There's very few other cities in the United States that have dingbats. And the dingbat is basically this block with parking underneath it. Particularly interesting to me because I did a study on the Hollywood arsonist a couple of years ago. The guy freaked out and burned up a bunch of places. And his MO was that he targeted dingbats. He would catch a car on fire underneath, and the car would catch the building on fire. Interestingly enough, if you plot all of his arsons and run a simple algorithm on it and say, where's the median point? It's 500 meters from where they caught him and 1,000 meters from his house. So my students all have to do that assignment. Power of geography. So let's turn away from Woody for a while and look at his friend, or flip that. Let's turn away from Buzz and look at Woody. Almost exactly framed in time with the modern architecture, this modern with an E on the end, the exaggerated modern, is a great deal of fascination with the Cowboys landscape as well. It sort of grows out of maybe that prairie style. It's definitely earthy, it's homegrown, and it's sort of a counterpoint. And I don't know, I've thought about it a lot, and I can't say with any certainty why these two would parallel each other so perfectly. Other than maybe this is a time of that the fear of all of this modern technology and what its consequences are also makes us long for this rural past that probably didn't exist, but only in the movies. You can only get steak here. And cocktails. I love to take pictures of wagon wheels on lights. This was at our very own King's restaurant just off campus, and it was some kind of steakhouse or something at some point, and in true LA fashion was bought apparently by Greeks for a while, so they added gyros to the menu, and then because most of the cook staff was apparently Mexican, then they added burritos, and that, so burgers, gyros, burritos, and then it was recently bought out by some Japanese people. And first they added a lot of teriyaki dishes, and now sushi. So that's LA. That's LA, baby. You can get it all. A gyro. And so now just, maybe some Chinese or Filipinos or maybe an African should buy it. And just let's get it, every continent represented in the food availability. So that's King's. And then if you had the good fortune to go to Clifton's Cafeteria downtown, they had all kinds of sort of mishmash of sort of Western, like, mountain man kind of motif and this sort of cowboy thing just thrown on for the hell of it. But they remodeled it, and I fear that the ox yoke lighting has been trashed. It's all gone now. Some entire neighborhoods went with Woody. And this is another one of my favorite old neighborhoods, and most of it is now, a lot of this has been torn down. This is over in Oxnard rather than Ventura. So there was Wagon Wheel Street, and it was close to the intersection of Saddle and Spur. There are a number of these in West Hills and Woodland Hills, these sort of references, street names to your spurs jingle, jangle, jingling. And the interesting thing is just how close a lot of those streets are to the Rocketdyne facility that was up in the hills, just next to it. So that, and then just over the hill from that, again, was the set for Gunsmoke, and beneath Oak Mountain, where the Nike missile facility was. And so these sort of cowboys and spacemen were, missiles and six-shooters were all close to each other in extreme close proximity. This would have only been better if it was like Saddle and Rocket Street. It would have been perfect. But I have some of that where they mix the metaphors later. You could have gone to the Wagon Wheel for bowling. I hope somebody saved this sign. It's gone now. Or you could have gone to the Wagon Wheel restaurant and spent the night in a hotel. Interestingly enough with this, and this is another font I like. I don't know what to call it. I call it the 49er font. But they went with the aquamarine, which was a real 60s color that seemed to be associated most of the time with Buzz rather than Woody.
That's down now too.
Yeah. And I could see that it was going, and so I, much to the chagrin of my wife and kids, I pulled them over. Hold on, I got to take pictures of all of this because it's going to go away.
Yeah, I did that too, but I was the only one in the car, so I got to.
Those you got. Yeah, well, they suffered through this with me. So more of the Woody font here, the 49er font. And this is what it's typically reserved for is, actual Western things. Barbecue. I think this is gone now, too. Big, huge hat. And I'm not sure that that's...
That's the one.
It's the hotline.
It's the hotline.
Oh. Should I answer?
It's Dr. Harrison.
Hello? No, you can call it the classroom. They hung up before I even got to finish my sentence. That's crazy, getting the wrong number. Pawnbrokers. This motif has been particularly useful for encouraging reckless behavior. So pawning your stuff off, eating badly, maybe stepping out on the wife at the Wagon Wheel Motel.
There's a bar in Long Beach that looks just like that.
Yeah, a lot of bars that involve alcohol. Farm Boys Liquor Mart, Mustang Liquor. This sign was recently removed, but was saved by the Valley Relics Museum. So they've been amassing a lot of cool signs over there. It was replaced with a backlit sign that had no life at all. I was just really disappointing, but luckily I got the photo before that. Some places have gone all in. This is up there next to Solvang. I forget what this little town is called.
Milton.
Is it?
Oh no, that's in look.
No, it's just south.
San Ynez.
Santa Ynez, yeah. So you can walk through the fake Danish town into the Spanish Mission, get in your car, drive past the Indian casino, and then wind up in Dodge City here. And I thought I'd put there was a guy walking across the street with the cowboy hat, the cowboy boots, and you know the whole thing. No cows or horses, but all the accoutrements of this. And so this is an invitation to step back in time. A liminal space where you don't behave like you should. All bets are off, right? And it's the kind of thing that appears in tourist traps, amusement parks. This one I don't understand at all. It's got the 49er font and a wagon, but, well...
And the coolest men's room in the state.
It's just crazy, but I liked it anyway, so I threw it in here. Casinos really leverage your irresponsible behavior because you're a cowboy, right? You know, woohoo, shoot the guns off and blow all your money. You can, you know, it's great. The Horseshoe Casino down in Bossier City, Louisiana. Whiskey Pete's! Which really has a mixed metaphor because somehow it got a castle on it. I don't understand that at all. I'm assuming that maybe the Cinderella's casino didn't work really well, so they had to rebrand it as something, and since it's out in the desert, Whiskey Pete's was better. Usually if you got cowboys, you also have Indians, and so this sort of motif frequently is leveraged right alongside the same sort of thing, not so much for gambling or drinking, but for that liminal space to have fun, and to, it shows up in tourist areas everywhere, even when it makes no sense at all. Moab.
Plains Indians.
The Indians in Moab certainly didn't live in teepees, but you know, it's fun. And, yeah, you can see the Wigwam Hotel and the old, very unforgiving slide film at 64 speed. If the lighting wasn't perfect, your camera just couldn't do anything. The El Vado, another sort of Indian theme thing. Even the national government gets in on this sort of thing, and I'm not sure that this is really something the U.S. government should be advancing, this imagery, but here it is. Standing Bears Trading Post, using the 49er font. This is here in the valley, but in a sort of a glassy steel building, so sometimes it doesn't work all that well. The expression that of all of Woody gets expressed in domestic architecture in the ranch-style house. Now, there's sort of really good ranches, and then there's just, we threw it in, or we just threw in the towel, or we're mailing it in ranches. But a lot of the early ones have these little cupolas on top to indicate, oh, it's a barn, or it's really Western. Look, Mom, we can live the simple life. And people, I think, really needed that. You know, after the Great Recession and the horrors of World War II, looking for the simple life and domestic tranquility, what's better than living down on the ranch? And the San Fernando Valley is absolutely covered in these. Clearly the dominant urban housing style for this area. Isn't it pretty? And a lot of the references to the Old West are subtle, and they come in the siding maybe the brickwork or that sort of thing. It's not like they've got wagon wheels hanging off, but I have seen those from the buildings. This is just down the street from my house, and it's identical to my house except flipped. And it's got, there's a number of these with the gambrel roof, which is a barn motif. And this is what I live in. But what's really weird is I stole this. I spent a longer time trying to find a picture of my own house than anything today, and couldn't find one. So I went to Google Street View, right? And my house is blurred out, and I don't know why. My house and my neighbor's house, you can't see them at all, completely blurry, and I don't understand why.
Naked sword fight? That's the thing we thought.
Yeah, I wonder what Ray was doing. I didn't understand me having a naked sword fight out in the front yard, but my neighbor Ray, he's pretty laid back. So, a lot of this. We wanted to live that simple life, and here just blocks was a nuclear meltdown, and many of the rockets, the intercontinental ballistic missiles that were pointed later at the Soviet Union were being constructed just blocks from this house. It's just really strange, having it in fourth gear and then throwing it in reverse, all at the same time. Sometimes they get confused altogether. So here we have the Art Deco sort of spaceman, and we've got Will Rogers. Now, this is not Buck Rogers of the 21st century. This is Will Rogers, the cowboy. But does anybody care? No, this is America. And this is actually what I would say an example of very early postmodern. You're mixing two motifs all together. Maybe they shouldn't be mixed, or, as I suggest in the essay, maybe it makes perfect sense. Spaceman, cowboy, they're all together. Here's another one. The Frontier. Now, is this space the final frontier? Or is it Yahoo? There's a snake in my boots, Frontier. Now, it's got sort of the 49er font, right? But if you look at the rest of the design motif, you're like, well, that's Woody and Buzz. They compromised. Got bikini bull riding going on there. Cold beer. And Mickey Gilly's place. That's all lost on this generation. The girls all get prettier at closing time.
Frontier's done too, though. So.
Yeah, so it's gone. Again, you got to get these pictures while you can. So here's another one that I like from, where is that? Somewhere up on the Central California coast. It's the Country Lane Motel. It's got a full, place where you can walk after you've rode your horse all the way up to someplace on the Central Coast, and your spurs will jangle on the boards there. You're at the motel, but there's a chevron. Couldn't get, Woody, Buzz had to get in on Woody's action there a little bit. And so it also finds expression in some of the houses. It's got the jet sweep roof and a barn door. You see the garage door that's still, so you got Woody and Buzz. Everybody's happy that way. And then this happened. And why do I have, do you guys know who this is? That's Edith and Archie. And they are a TV family.
These guys over here all looking at it like, what?
No, you guys haven't seen this? So this is, yeah, so they sing a song.
Don't sing the song.
In the song, they're singing here, he's the arch conservative. Ignorant, working class, doesn't believe in women's liberation, can't stand the hippies, can't understand why people are burning their bras and draft cards, And he represents this sort of silent majority. Sound familiar? That swept in part Nixon into office, right? And at the beginning of this television show, they sing a song called "Those Were the Days," and it's a lament for the time before the mid-century. And the line goes, "And you knew who you were then, girls were goyles were goyles and men were men." So they're New Yorkers. "Mister, we could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. We didn't need a welfare state. Everybody pulled their weight." Right? Before all of this modernism, before Woody and Buzz. Right? Want to go back to the 1890s, which is another theme that you should look for on the built environment, right? The brick sidewalks and the fake gas lamps, right? Brand new gas lamps that have LED bulbs in them, right? Mm-hmm. You know they're brand new, but you still are, it's 1890s, right? They're doing it all over downtown LA. Anytime you go to an amusement park, they almost always have 1890s land, right? Fuddruckers, ice cream, right? There's always an ice cream parlor and a Coney Island, the roller coaster ride. That's another one of those eras that has in the American imagination a set of values that go with it. And with that, around 1970, a lot of things changed. Our McDonald's, which were at one point more like this one. This is a new retro McDonald's, but there was the old actual retro McDonald's, and those gave way to mansard roofs. This is called the environmental look, and it was a rejection of the glass and steel and modernity and all of that. I worked in a Burger King that looked very much like this during the 70s or the 80s, and I wore all brown. And it had a yellow stripe and an orange stripe. And it was supposed to look organic and natural. It was going back, right? It was all made out of plastic, though. Right? Complete polyester. I thought it was crazy. And a lot of these McDonald's with their mansard roofs had fake plastic roofs, right, that were to look like wood. Looked like recycled bricks. It was supposed to be getting back to some imaginary time. That's the McDonald's of the 70s. And it was a rejection of, particularly of Buzz, less so of Woody. But it's not really Woody either. It's certainly not Cowboy. We got rid of the old one. These are kind of hard to find now, right? These things. This was a little photo map. Which, people do know this because of that 70s show. But for a while, nobody could figure out what these things were. You'd drive up and give them their film, and they would process and drive back later. And now, but it had the mansard roof. There's a mansard roof there. There's a mansard roof here. All very 1970s. The end of the mid-century had come. Nixon was elected, and our hope had drained away. That lasted for about a generation, and then they said, let's paint all that brown stuff over and try to make it look kind of 50s again by going with red and white, like In-N-Out, which never left that motif, right? They stayed Buzz the whole way through. They're still that way. It looks retro. They just never went away from it. Eventually, though, that gave way, and that wasn't good enough, so they made the brand new retro McDonald's. And I'm not sure where this one may be in. There's one in Vegas, and then there's one out on Foothill that has the weird McDonald's with the crossbar on it on Foothill Boulevard out towards like Rancho Cucamonga or someplace like that. And there's another sort of retro McDonald's. It's trying to bring back now Buzz. We're apologizing for abandoning the hopefulness of, well, which is interesting because in the 50s, this was forward-looking, but now this is backward-looking. So what was once futuristic is now nostalgic instead. It's an interesting combo. So the last couple of slides here, this is what I think became of Woody. It's less sort of cowboy, but somehow still rustic. This is what is called, I don't know, the Oaks shopping at the crossing of fox jumping, something like that. It's got to reference horses and some bit of snobbery, right? But it might be an old train station. It might be a reference to lodges in the Great Western Park. But this is sort of what Woody is today. This is out in Agora Hills, just as they built this, and I thought, oh, I like that because yeah.
Right off the freeway.
Yeah, it's there at the Canaan exit. And when they were building it, I thought, oh, look, what is it trying to do? It is trying to be rustic, but classy. Not retro like cowboys, but still rustic, still woodsy, but not woody. So that is a common motif today that I think is the grandchild of Woody. And I think this is the grandchild of Buzz. And I don't know if this design motif, which pops up all over the place now in McDonald's, but also in many of the Chipotles or this sort of thing. And there is a sort of a cleanness to it. It's not begging to be thought of as hygienic, and your hamburger is not going to give you food poisoning. We can trust it now. I call this the apple design motif. It is, a lot of it's clean. There's frequently white. It's not overly spacey. It's just supposed to look efficient and modern and clean and trouble-free. Apple or the Google landscape. It's the post-21st century. It doesn't look like it's going to fly, but it looks like it may calculate.
From an architectural perspective, it's kind of a mix of the modernity of the glass and the steel with new brutalism, the German brutalism movement with the big blocky sort of a thing.
Yeah, a lot of the new McDonald's have this sort of, it's an arch motif, but it's not really like a St. Louis arch. The parabola it's sort of flat, and it's just a flare. I don't know what to call it, but most of them have those. Don't know what quite to call it, but I think this is Buzz's grandchild. And it'll take a while, I suppose, and it'll be for a generation or two to look back on us and what did we do. The building across from us, it's not Santa Susana, that's the prison. What's the other one called?
Manzanita.
Manzanita. It's got that swoop, that flare, in an otherwise sort of clean lines building like that. I think that's the end of chapter 20. Do you guys have questions or comments? Look at the size of that file as a PowerPoint. Whoa! And as the PDF. That is. There's my textbook at 101, and it's double the size. Those photos are really big. I've got to cut them down. Anyway, questions, comments? Okay.
Steve, I have a question and then I have a comment. I was really intrigued by your photos of the restaurants that were pastrami and tacos and burritos, and I'm wondering if that is how recently they were featuring that kind of eclectic menu as opposed to those being what was originally served at those restaurants.
I've asked a lot of people about that combination, and I haven't gotten an answer. I can understand the burgers and the pastrami,
Yeah.
right, and then burritos
Yeah.
added later. But burgers and pastrami seem to only show up in Los Angeles. I've never seen that sort of combination, and I don't know. Is it pastrami sort of to me it's a Jewish deli thing,
Right.
but these things show up all over LA, and LA, has Jewish people, but it's not New York. It's not east side of Cleveland. It's not like, Jewish land, but it's here. I don't understand it.
Well, I think the reason I ask, and this leads into my comment, which is specifically about the tacos, because I am not so young, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I grew up in West Los Angeles in the 1960s during an era of massive white flight out of West Los Angeles, and the place of refuge was the San Fernando Valley. And the San Fernando Valley in the 1960s was not the ethnically diverse community that we see here today.
Well,
And
1.2 million people, 50,000 non-whites.
right, and so I read, first of all, so that's why I was curious about those restaurants, because that certainly there's probably the pastrami makes sense. Okay, because frankly, the white flight was primarily West Side Jews
Okay.
who were fleeing, to the valley, and I'm having a very visceral reaction right now because my parents refused to move, and they actually had people in my elementary school who told my parents that they were going to report them for child abuse because my parents refused to move to the valley instead of keeping us in the city where we would go to integrated schools. I mean, so it was a very vicious time. I have such a viscerally negative reaction to the valley that my husband and I actually, when we got married, vowed we would never live north of Mulholland because we did not.
Here you are.
And look where I'm working. But to me, I read the Woody, and I didn't read your essay, so I read Woody and Buzz as white.
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, the message there that's being sent is astronauts were all white, cowboys were all white, and this is a white haven. And so it's interesting to me. Yes, maybe modernity, maybe looking back, but given my experience growing up, and when you started talking about that, when you're reading the landscape and thinking about the people and the dynamics of the time, to me, that was a piece that was kind of missing from that exposition of the, of the architecture. And I think you need to bring race into it. I think you can't. I mean, we should be talking, I think, about that. I mean, it's a part of the Valley's history that people don't want to talk about. But I think it's critically important to understand that.
Absolutely. I think I spend a good bit of time on it.
Okay. Well, I didn't read you. That's why I said I didn't read your thing. So
hyper-masculine, white, gender certain, and paternalistic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was beyond. Yeah. So when all those houses were being built, both the ranch houses and the mid-century, modern houses. That was all about, hey, this is a white haven.
Yeah, and the houses, these sort of ranch-style houses, a domestic space, all built to the specifications of men on top of it. The counter heights were all wrong. They were built up, for somebody who was 6 foot tall that would never really be in the kitchen.
I have a question in regard, the horsey areas, if you will. As a Southern Californian, that's all I've ever seen is that if there's an equestrian area, it has the Western theme. Is that not the case in other states?
I don't know. Horses don't. It's certainly in Kentucky. Horses don't
Convey
suggest
Western, yeah.
cowboys.
Yeah, East Coast, say horse country around Washington D.C. It's all sort of English saddles, and it's not.
Yes,
It's not cowboys at all.
dressage.
See, 'cause that doesn't seem strange to me. My question about like Saddle and Spur Road, I wondered if there were at one point, in addition to the wagon wheel theme of the, if those had been horse properties at some point, if the lots had been large
Well,
enough to
they
be horse
clearly
products.
evoke it, right?
Right, but I
Yeah.
wondered if they had
Well, they're-
actually been. See, I'm from the South Bay, so in
Oh.
Palos Verdes we have Silver Spur Road,
Yeah.
but those were all horse properties.
Right.
I think almost all of Los Angeles at one point was horse country. Certainly all of this was ranch
Yeah.
land. And they were all ranchos,
Right.
virtually the entire areas. But I think it is a lot more common on the former ranchos. So the Ellis Scorpion Rancho out here at the
Right.
Western Valley, there's a lot of it's turned up, to 11 there.
Well, and the whole setting of Calabasas,
Yeah.
that whole thing.
Yeah, I wanted to just respond to Kathy a little bit about those homes, the Eichler homes. Just anecdotally, I thought that was there was a bit of a social experiment involved in that particular group of homes that I think the architect had actually started in Northern California, and then this was another project. And one of the objectives was to actually sell some of these homes to create a more integrated community.
Oh,
It
that's
was more like
so.
an experiment, but I don't know how well it was carried out, because I know that land, for example, there were land restrictions from selling to African Americans
Yes.
up into the 1950s or
Uh,
60s.
No.
60s.
They're still in the CCNRs in many of those places.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been voided by the courts,
yeah.
but if you go back and you read the original CCNRs,
66 here in Northridge, a black professor was hired, wanted to move into the valley, into Northridge, and had a big fight, and eventually got to move in. But at that point, you'd be like, "I'm moving out."
It's interesting, but even within the racial issue about this, there's also, and stop me if I've got this wrong, but in the ranch style house, there was sort of a, I don't know if you'd say egalitarian ethos, but they were sort of, middle class neutral in that regard. I mean, they had big windows. You didn't have a hedge around you. You looked right into people's houses as you walked up and down the streets. So, and I've read this too, but I can't remember where. And that there was a sort of a class homogeneity that was being sort of promoted in there. I mean, I remember where I grew up in New Mexico, and it's sort of their ranch style, and I really remember that going around streets where, and you're just every house is the same, but not in terms of the architecture, in terms of how it was presented. It was almost like you could walk right into everybody's living room, even though you didn't. You never had a fence. You never had sort of closed window shades. It was all open in that way by design. But it was also all white. Although in New Mexico it was white and Latino, but it was still kind of that ethos there. And it's like when you build it, I hate hedges, man. I walk by a house with a hedge in front. It's like it just shrieks class at me. Even though who knows what that is, but just coming from my own sort of conditioning where that just wasn't, it was pretentious. Put a hedge up around your house, and your neighbors are like, whoa, who's this? And then so no one did.
The ranch house for a Midwestern kid, in the neighborhood that I've moved into is West Hills, vast stretches of ranch-style houses, all exactly the same, very egalitarian, but no front. No porches. They're all turned to the backyard, which is another sort of Western thing, the nucleated family. They're frequently open to the backyard, the barbecue, the pool, whereas where I grew up, the house opens to the front and there's a porch, and there were always kids on each other's front porches all of the time, and bicycles parked in front yards. But, I had a neighbor, and he lived across the street from me 5 years, and I never met him because he would he would come home from work, and he would pull in, the garage door would go up, and it would fall behind him. And it wasn't until they were moving out and having a yard sale that I actually met him, and I thought, dude, we could have been buddies, we had a lot in common, but that was the design of the house. And he had a yard man, right? I still mow my own grass, but so that's the only time I meet the neighbors is when they're walking the dog and I'm mowing the grass. It's the design of the house.
I wonder if that's also related to the limited public space, that's kind of says something about the way people socialize in the valley. It's this, gatherings, large gatherings in these homes that have big open spaces.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of home I have right now. It's got like 2 double living rooms. It's just all open in the middle for for everyone to come and stay there, do their thing, don't interact with anyone else, your neighbor or anybody else, and you don't need to act.
There's an 8-foot fence around the backyard, so you can't even see the neighbors in most of the valley.
Redwood trees. I mean, there's we're clothed like almost like a forest around us for privacy.
So they took that sort of, you mean a home on the range, can't do it in the valley because we're all next to each other. So we'll put up fences so we don't, we have land, lots of land under sunny skies. Don't fence me in. But it's sort of, you don't really know. We're plenty neighborly, but the next neighbor's, 2 miles away or something like that.
Students, does anybody have a question or any comments you guys want to make? It's such a great presentation for training the eye. I don't think you can drive around the San Fernando Valley in quite the same way anymore. Now you're going to be looking for pointy things.
Put your Jedi goggles on, and if you start to think of the landscape as a text, and you actively start to try to read it. What is that building trying to say? I have an assignment where they have to go and take pictures of signs and try to interpret it without reading the words, right? There's words there, but what's the font say? What's the materials say? All of those sorts of things, and it's a good little game to play with yourself, and you'll start to say, look, the sign says friendly neighbors, right? But it's next to the bars on the window, right? Or this is a drug-free campus. As soon as you see that, you know that must be a problem, right? This is a safe neighborhood watch. So the words say one thing, but the message is something different, and a lot of that's just trying to realize that text isn't the only form of communication, and anthropologists ought to be every bit as good at that as geographers. We all do the same thing. We just ask questions in a different sequence, I think.
So where does the horrifying circus liquors fit into this?
That is a weird one.
It's so, it's horrifying, but
well,
it's just so incongruous.
It's with the Cinderella casino, right? The casinos over in, because casinos use those motifs to try to separate you from your money, and there was the one that's the fantasy sort of castle. Excalibur. My kids wanted to go there because it was like a Harry Potter, casino, and but what does that make you want to spend your money? I can understand cowboys or New York or, Bellagio, Roman orgies, those sorts of things. They're trying to get you to think you're a high roller, but
King Arthur's Court is sort of regal. Although it's the cheapest place on the strip.
I never thought that they gambled, and then there was the what was it? The Circus, right? That was like for kids, we would go there but not gamble or anything. It didn't work on us. I don't know, but it takes a lot of the fun out of it after you realize the landscape is trying to get you to spend your money recklessly. There's a really good article called "Magic of the Mall" by John Goss, who's another really good. And then the mall becomes a shocking machine for separating you from your cash, all with the landscape, right? So it's a fun read, though. Jedi goggles.
Anything else?
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me show pictures. One of my professors had said he would he'd do sort of it was an hour and a half class. The first hour would be him talking, and the second would just be slideshow. He would just shut up. Just look at these. You know, I always enjoyed that. I don't know if anybody else does it.